Now, yesterday, Brian Flores was scheduled to meet with the media. Flores now is the defensive coordinator with the Minnesota Vikings, and he appeared at the podium flanked by a few players that play for the Vikings currently. Many thought that as support of Flores as he addressed Tua's comments.
Look, I'm human, so, that hit me in a way that, wasn't, I wouldn't say it was, positive for me. But at the same time, I've got to use that and say, hey, how can I grow from that? How can I be better? And that's really where I'm at from that standpoint. Do I feel like, that's me? No. But, how can I grow from that situation and create a world where that's not, the case that anyone says that about Brian Flores?
In the spirit of two sides to every story, Peter, we at the table, Kyle was here with us, got to kind of unpack Tua's comments first, and now we're all going to respond to Brian Flores. But since we didn't get to chat yesterday, Peter, I want to hear what you have to think about Tua and then take us to Brian Flores.
Well, I think the entirety of this is actually a really good public conversation about coaching, about playing, about mental health. I think it's really good to have this out in the open. And Flores comes from the old school. Belichick, you just pack it. Nothing leaves this building. We don't talk publicly. We don't air it out. But when Tua's going to name his name and really be as vulnerable and as candid as he was, Flores has to respond. And I think it's comfortable for Flores to probably go up there and just be like, look, I'm a Vikings coach. That was years ago. Like, I'm focusing on what Harrison Smith does on defense. He's like, no, I'll talk about it. Here's what I know about Brian Flores. I know Brian Flores grew up in Brownsville, New York, in a rough area of Brooklyn, if I'm being candid. Went to Poly Prep, where he was a star player, goes to BC. And he said in that press conference yesterday that we didn't call, like, look, like, coaches are my idols growing up. Like, my Pop Warner coach, like, took me out of a bad situation for a lot of other people and made my life, like, gave me a light. My high school coach at Poly Prep, was my guiding light in that situation. To BC, to that he loved it so much that he wanted to become a coach himself. I think that Brian probably saw that, and I didn't speak to him, and I haven't spoken to Flores on the Tua situation in quite a while, but I think he had to see that and say, okay, it's finally my time to address this. And he didn't say, yeah, but Tua stunk, or Tua showed up late, or I wanted Justin Herbert, or Ryan Fitzpatrick was there. Why would we start Tua? Instead, he was like, I heard that, it hurt, and we're moving on. And it wasn't easy for him to listen to that. The fact that we're having this public conversation about being discouraging and talking down to players and that wasn't happening in the Parcells era. That wasn't happening necessarily in the Belichick era. So we look at coaches now. Where do players always want to play? They want to go to L.A. to play for Sean McVay because it looks like it's a blast. They want to go, play for Andy Reid because he makes the best version of yourself. The era of I'm coach, you're player, I talk down to you, and I'm a red, you know what, and you're going to get at it. I don't know if that exists anymore. Even Sean Payton, who's an old school coach, has seemingly softened a little bit in this era as opposed to his early days with the Saints. I love that we're having the public conversation, and I love that Flores addressed them publicly and did so in such a way where he didn't disrespect Tua, and he also didn't deny anything. He said, here's where we're at, we're moving on, and it's unfortunate that he talked about it that way, and that was his experience.
Yeah, and the part that I loved was the fact that, in the beginning of that press conference, he says that he was going to learn from this. And I think that's really all that you can do is really learn from that situation. And I'm sure even in it hurting him, Brian Flores saying that, that there's area for growth. And that recognition, taking the high road and not kind of going back at Tua, I thought that spoke volume of the type of man and the coach he is. And I said this again yesterday, that it doesn't have to be that Tua was wrong, that Coach Flores was wrong. I think there's something to learn here. I do know this, though, from the player's psyche, from the player's mindset, and just in general, when you talk about it being a general public conversation about what an athlete might go through, is that it takes 10 positives to erase one negative. And so I found it interesting that Tua said it took him about 2 years to kind of overcome that. And it is when you talk about mental health and you talk about the struggles of trying to overcome self-doubt and all the other stuff, it is a high-performance sport. I mean, it can be taxing on you as a person. And so in their situation, you had two people who came into a situation where it wasn't by choice. You know what I mean? Flores Tua came into the situation, and, you know, it happens. Sometimes the chemistry of a coach and player doesn't work out, and it's okay. So I don't think we need to demonize anything, but we need to learn, like Coach Flores said, you learn from this situation. I will say, lastly, on that part is that, you know, there was a reporter who asked if he had reached out. And I really hope that at some point they can have a conversation so they can kind of wrap that up and so they can kind of grow from it and continue. Because, you know, forgiveness is giving up the hope that the past could be any different. It happened. It is what it is. Now you got to move forward.
I was surprised at the restraints and the poise. Can you imagine right now, Brian Flores? He's trying to run the Vikings defense. He's trying to get them together. He's trying to get them ready for the opener. And someone comes and taps him on the shoulder and is like, Coach, you know, there's a news story right now where Tua went on a local show that he talks to all the time with a pretty big platform and pretty much just teed off on you about things that happened 3 years ago and is telling everyone that you bullied him and said he was a loser and whatnot. And he's like, oh, my God. It's tough for him at this point. It's August. It's football season time. Not only to have to deal with that and step aside from his duties as the Vikings D coordinator, has nothing to do with the Dolphins, but to not say, oh, really? Because I got my story to tell, too. Tua was afraid of his own shadow. I benched him because Fitzpatrick was better and Jacoby was better. If we're going to do, like, he could have, I'm sure there's a lot of things he could have said about Tua and maybe perceived weaknesses that he had, and he didn't do any of that. And I think it's especially strong because, listen, this is a classically trained Bill Belichick coach. Not only are you nothing with the media, Belichick spent 20 years teeing off on Tom Brady at every chance he got. Tom Brady, not Tua Tagovailoa. Tom Brady was sitting there with 5 Super Bowl rings at one point, and Belichick's telling him how terrible this throw was, how awful you are in this drive in front of the team. So to Flores, that's what you do, and that's how you toughen guys up. But I think there's a lot of context here, is very well established. Brian Flores wanted Justin Herbert to be the Dolphins quarterback. He did not get him because allegedly ownership wanted Tua. So immediately when he's saying things like, you're not supposed to be here, which is one of the alleged quotes, it's right on the nose. Like, I didn't want you. But I also think, like, this idea of this is how I coach and I don't break it, I think is ignorant. I think it's prideful. I think it's lazy. And I would look at parenting the same way. I don't think you coach every player the same. I don't think you parent every kid the same, whether that's in your living room or you're a Little League baseball coach. Different kids, different needs. And the real artful, successful coaches say, here are my core values as a coach, but I'm going to go above and beyond to figure out what makes this player tick. I got 53 of them, and it's really difficult. But as someone as important as the quarterback we just drafted in the first round, if this kid is not responding to what I'm putting in, do I just stay to him like, I don't care, then you don't fit with me? No. Like, you got to swallow your ego and say, all right, well, he's not taking the tough love. Maybe he and I go out and get a beer together or play cornhole or something. It sounds like Flores, the first-time head coach at the time, was not willing to bend, and it sounds like he pretty much broke Tua. I think that Brian Flores will be a head coach again someday. The players like him. He's a really talented guy, and I think it'll be different. And whoever that quarterback is going to be great because Flores is going to be like, whatever you want, let's do it. Surprised that he showed that much restraint, but impressed.
I don't know, because it's the quarterback, and Flores is a classically trained defensive coach, how this went. But if you wanted to get a line of former Patriots defensive players who would talk about Brian Flores in a positive way, it would be a line around this block in Manhattan. It starts first and foremost with our old colleague, Jason McCourty, and it goes to Dante Hightower, and it goes to Patrick Chung, and it could go through the list. And it's like, but like you said, this is a quarterback. This is a rookie quarterback, and he had a veteran in Ryan Fitzpatrick in the room who he thought he had a better chance to win with. Very unique situation, and I think you're right. Though it's never been confirmed on either side, I don't think Flores would have picked Tua over Herbert if that was a decision, if we were to go back and ask him in 2020 in that draft.
Well, and I'm glad for Brian Flores that he has players from his past defensive coaching that would stand up for him, from his current role with the Minnesota Vikings defensively that would defend him. But I take an issue with the Brian Flores head coaching version, apparently, now that we're hearing about. And if Brian Flores, I believe this, if someone's saying something about you and it is not true, I believe that you will come out and say, this is not true. He would have looked in the camera. But the fact that he said, that hurt me, I understand where I have room for growth, I think he now acknowledges that some of that was not the right way to go about things and that the way Tua interpreted it is exactly how it went down. What I take great issue with is the fact that Tua Tagovailoa, again, I spoke on this yesterday, came from the greatest college football program at the time. You have, if Tua arrives in Miami as your rookie quarterback and says, if you want to know anything about me and how to set me up for success, why don't you reach out to my college coach, who, mind you, is also a defensive-minded coach, who, mind you, is also from the Bill Belichick coaching family. He's not under Nick Saban, the tree. He's part of the family. So if Nick Saban can change the way that he approached Tua Tagovailoa to put him in his greatest light when he was in college, how come Brian Flores can't reach out? Because you guarantee you Tua would have put him on the phone and said, if you want to know anything about me and how to put me in a great spot, talk to Nick Saban. And the fact that Brian Flores didn't at the time have the space or the capacity to do that, I put that on him. And if and when he does get another head coaching opportunity, I certainly hope he approaches, to Kyle's point, parenting and coaching differently for each individual player, because putting them in the best spot both on the field and off the field is the most imperative part of success.
You know, Jamie, I love what you're saying, but, you know, and I also know this, that there's no real blueprint, right, when you're dealing with different personalities. And I think the expectation, if I had to kind of pick at kind of how Tua handled this, I think, to me, to have the expectation that Brian Flores would have known how it was impacting him, I think it's a little misleading. I think to be, as a grown man, to be able to say, hey, you know what, this is how I'm feeling about this, even if you had to internalize this, you know, a year later or whatever. Now, of course, you know, you got paid, you're feeling good, whatever. Even now that you're comfortable, he's away, to be able to go up and pick up the phone and say, hey, coach, I need to talk to you about this. This is how this impacted me. I think to go to the media, because to me, real resolution comes in being able to confront the person who did it to you, rather than go to the media makes it big, then he's doing a response from the outside. Like, just like, I'm a grown man, because I know if one of my coaches ever disrespected me like that and I felt some type of way afterwards, I'm calling that person. So
Just to bring it full circle, the initial question of Tua was not specifically like, hey, let's just rail on Brian Flores right now. It was about how are you different? And so that's kind of where it came from. But it wasn't about, like, Tua wasn't like, hey, let me come in and just, like, beat down on Brian Flores. It was about how Tua has changed over the last couple of years. And we're happy to see Tua the where he's at right now.